This is All of It. I'm David First, in for Allison Stewart. I hope you're staying cool on a hot day in the city. On today's show, we head to the beach with Rockaway native reporter Katie Honan. She'll be our ride-along as we kick off our Summer in the City series, and she'll talk about some great things to do in Queens during the summer months. And please call in with your suggestions. That's coming up later. Janet Fash was the city's first female chief lifeguard. She writes about her life and career in her new memoir. It is called Lifeguard, a Love Story. She joins us to talk about it. And writer Katie Weaver is here to talk about the phenomenon and history of garage sales. That's the plan, so let's get this started with Yewande Komolafe. Walking around New York City can be a chaotic experience. You're constantly dodging construction work and crowds. You're crossing streets filled with potholes. You're stepping up curbs and moving around obstacles. For a lot of us, that chaos tends to melt into the landscape of city living. But as anyone with mobility issues knows, being able to tune it out is a privilege. Yewande Komolafe is a food writer for the New York Times, and in 2024, she endured a long and problem-ridden hospitalization that left her in a wheelchair. So, all of a sudden, a lot of the city that she had come to know so well was inaccessible to her. To kick off Disability Pride Month here on July 1st, we are joined by Yewande. She has a piece in the New York Times about how she's been rediscovering the city as a wheelchair user. Yewande, welcome. It is great to have you on the show.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
And listeners, we would love to invite you to join this conversation as well. We want to hear from you. Do you have any recommendations for good spots to visit in the city that are also accessible? If you're a wheelchair user or have other mobility challenges, what is the most frustrating thing that you encounter in daily life in the city, and how do you cope with it? What are the best wheelchair-friendly places to go? Let us know. Here's the number to call, 212-433-9692. That's 212-433-WNYC. And Yewande, when you recovered enough from hospitalizations that you were able to get out a little bit and start moving around the city, what was the first thing that hit you, the first thing you realized about city life that maybe you had not noticed before?
I realized how bumpy the streets were, and I don't think that I had ever really thought about it and to the extent that I do now.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm going out, just like outside my door, I realized like, oh, okay, this sidewalk is super bumpy. I'm going to cross the road and go to the other sidewalk walk, which is less bumpy. And so I realized like how bumpy the terrain was.
I mean, that's a great example of something you probably never gave another thought to in the past.
No,
Right.
I typically, I always loved cobblestone streets
Oh,
because I know I love like the aesthetic of it. I love the
right.
look of it, but like those feel impossible to
Mm.
navigate now on wheels.
Yeah, I mean, that's one example. But, when it came to re-entering just day-to-day life, what did you expect to be an issue, and what really came as a surprise aside from the bumpy terrain?
I imagine that I would have a wheelchair that would go over any like little step.
Mm-hmm.
So steps became such an issue. And right now, if it's a step to enter the building, it's completely inaccessible to me
Mm-hmm.
if there's no ramp. And I just realized like, oh, it's so important to have ramps to enter the building because the entire building becomes inaccessible to me if there's no ramp.
And that happen, and that's anywhere in the chain, right? It
Yeah,
can be 99% accessible, but
exactly.
if
Yeah.
there's what you're talking about, it stops everything in its tracks.
In its tracks, absolutely.
Hmm.
And I think that as an able-bodied person, I never really realized how much steps could be interruptive in just access. It's like I really enjoyed restaurants that were like hidden and like you
Hmm.
go down a flight of steps and like you go to the back of the the building, and there's like all of a sudden there's like a food to discover, but completely inaccessible to me right now
Hmm.
in a wheelchair.
If you would like to join this discussion, give us a call. It's 212-433-9692. That's 212-433 WNYC. And I want to talk about your piece in the Times. This talks about a 3-day staycation you took, right, with your
Mhm, mhm.
husband to reconnect with the city. You treated it like you were a tourist. Why was that framing helpful to approach it like maybe you were brand new here?
Mm. Um, I think oftentimes in my life, I've felt like I have to rediscover my body. And I felt like almost a tourist in my body because like living with sickle cell, like I've been through illnesses, I've been through like hospitalizations. And the journey back to myself has always been a journey and almost a distant away from me. And so this process, like likening the city to my body, felt like a reclamation of myself through the lens of the city and or through the lens of like food or through the lens, whatever lens I choose to surround myself with. And so rediscovering the city almost felt like a reclamation for me to like, I love New York City. Like I'm still here in New York City.
Mm,
Let me find a way to rediscover it
mm,
in a way that it works for me. And like that's a process that's been pretty frequent all my life. And so it felt like another step to like rediscovering both myself and the city.
Someone is texting in to say, yes, using a kneeling scooter is almost impossible because of all of the uneven sidewalks
Mm-hmm.
and potholes in the street.
Oh, potholes. Yep. Those are also a thing. Yep.
Also a thing. Well, let's talk through some of the favorite spots that you discovered. Maybe let's start with Little Island. This is that funny looking pier on the west of Manhattan made up of these little pods. Sort of, they look like golf tees poking up out of the
Mhm.
Hudson River.
It was actually quite incredible. I loved navigating Little Island, and I was surprised by how much of it was accessible to me.
Hmm.
Um, I remember like getting in was there was like cobblestone streets, or I don't remember clearly, but it felt like cobblestone streets, and but so it was a bit of a jiggle getting in, but like once I was in, I was able to navigate all the little islands, and it was such a great perspective to behold the city and across the water in that way. It felt really special. And it was also a place I had never visited, like in
Mm.
my car. I'd never like stopped to pause and just notice what it was doing there. So it was new to me, and it was also just like an ecstatic experience.
So getting there was a little difficult, but once you were there, you were surprised to find that there were a lot of it was accessible.
Yeah, a lot of it was accessible. Absolutely.
I want to read this text that just came through. If you want to join this conversation or perhaps send us a text, 212-433-9692. That's 212-433 WNYC. James writes in to say, I have a different challenge than your guest. I have been blind for the last 25 years. I use my stick and depend on the kindness of strangers. My blindness has connected me to more and more people as I listen and I become more involved in the landscape of the city.
Mm,
Really
that's
interesting.
beautiful.
Yeah, it is beautiful. Have you found a way to connect with people in the city?
I have, surprisingly.
Hmm.
And I would say yes, because I feel like in lines or just coming in contact with anybody, there's always that like smile and nod that I do to other wheelchair users to be like, oh, I see you and they see me, which feels like a really special moment to see someone else in a wheelchair, sort of like experiencing the city in the way that I do now. So yeah.
And let's take a call. This Mark calling in from Brooklyn. Welcome to all of it. Do you have an experience about getting around the city with a wheelchair?
Yeah, thank you so much for taking my call. My sister visited, and she had a spinal cord injury, and so she was in a wheelchair. And I was really excited because I lived on the F train at Church Avenue, and I was like, "Oh, it's wheelchair accessible." And she was going with her son to go to Penn Station to look at colleges, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, you can transfer at J Street and get right to Penn Station." And it was exciting. And they went. She went with her son, and he pushed her. And Church Avenue was great. And they got it out of J Street to change, and the A train came, and it was like 3 inches taller than the platform.
Hmm.
And they're like, "Oh no!" And luckily, this is New York, and three beefy guys jumped out of the train and lifted her onto the onto the train. So the pros and cons of New York City, right?
Hmm.
I love that. Yeah.
I mean, that sets up all questions about where else is this going to be a problem? What about when we come back? Mark, are you still there? Oh, I think we maybe lost Mark, but
Oh, okay.
let's talk a little bit more about subway stations, right? A lot of subway stations don't have an elevator, and even in the ones that do, there is famously a big gap between the train and the platform. How do you think about transportation? And how do what do you do to get around?
Yeah, I would be honest and say that I have not been brave enough to ride the subway since
Mm.
being in a wheelchair. Um, and specifically for the reasons that you just mentioned, like the lack of elevators, the gap between the train and the platform. But I have gotten a lot of accessible Ubers and Lyfts that I didn't realize were a thing. And there's also Accessoride. Um, but I think that I navigate the city now typically using one of those options, an accessible vehicle.
And not even imagining to deal with something like the subway system.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that the subway system I think that the buses are accessible, but I'm not sure. I also haven't navigated the buses yet. So,
We're speaking with New York Times food writer Yewande Komolafe. And I want to mention another spot that you visited during your New York City staycation. You also went, I mean, you were talking about, difficult to navigate restaurants that you used to love to go to. You also went to the Birdland Jazz Club. And when we think about a jazz club, that can evoke a particular image, right? Low lighting,
yeah, yes.
slightly crowded, a little hard
Yeah.
to push through.
Very intimate. Yes.
Very intimate, maybe not the
Yeah.
easiest place to navigate in a wheelchair, but tell us about your experience.
Oh gosh, it was so lovely. I got wheeled right from the street right up to the stage, which was incredible. It was almost like they had created like a passageway to get right up to the stage. And I was seated um stage right, and I could see everything. It was such an intimate experience where I felt like I was watching front and center Dee Dee Bridgewater, which it was so incredible. And I really credit Birdland for having an accessible way to get to the stage and watch the show. It was really incredible.
Yeah, that's a big thumbs up there for Birdland. I just want to ask you on a personal level, what was it like being in a club and having that sort of experience after your very difficult hospitalizations?
It was so lovely.
Mm.
It was almost like a tribute to myself or my past self. There's been three instances. I've gone to Birdland for that concert. I've gone also to the Music Hall of Williamsburg to see Obong Jaya. And it was also such an incredible experience where I was above the stage and I could see everything happening in front of me. And I also went to a rave that was put on by these two siblings. It was called Face Strapped,
Hmm.
and it was in September of 2025. And it was put on specifically for people with disabilities and anybody that's their ally. And it was an incredible experience because I saw all kinds of wheelchairs. I saw all kinds of like accessible. There was like a bed that got wheeled into the dance floor
Hmm.
to for like a
Wow.
performance. It was an incredible experience.
Wow.
And so like I think that the nightlife seemed to me that it was going to be distant from me as a wheelchair user and as an amputee, but it feels like there's a whole world out there that's catering to people with
Hmm.
disabilities, which is so important and so special
So inspiring.
and inspiring. Exactly.
We're speaking with food writer Yewande Komolafe with the New York Times. She has a piece in the Times about rediscovering the city as a wheelchair user. We're going to continue this conversation in just a moment. And if you want to join the conversation, here's that number again. It's 212-433-9692, 212-433 WNYC. This is All of It. It's All of It on WNYC. I'm David First, and we're speaking with New York Times food writer Yewande Komolafe about her journey to rediscover New York City as a wheelchair user. To join this discussion, 212-433-9692. We're going to get to more of your calls. I also want to read this text that came through. I'm glad to finally have so many more curb cuts in New York City. But so many of them in my neighborhood have massive puddles in front of them, full of green, trash-filled water, making them unusable. Is that something you've experienced?
That is so true.
Hmm.
Yes, yes. Um, Sometimes there's a huge, like, messy puddle in front of the curb cut, and it makes it almost impossible to navigate because I don't really want to go through that water and like collect it on my wheels.
Mm.
What I've also found surprising is that it's mulberry season right now, and my neighborhood has a lot of mulberry trees. And the mulberries get stuck in my wheels, and
Oh
I
my
end up
gosh.
dragging it home.
Mulberry
And
season, a
yeah,
completely different thing in
I
your mind
know.
now.
Yeah, exactly. And
Wow.
I end up like navigating around the trees just so I don't get it stuck in my wheels.
Hmm.
So there's like different points in which where um to think about where I can't just like scrape it off my wheels easily.
Mm-hmm.
But the puddles are definitely a hindrance to navigating the streets as well.
Let's hear from Zoe calling in from Long Island City. Welcome to All of It.
Hi, I wanted to mention Culture Lab LIC, and it's totally wheelchair accessible. If you take the 7 train to Court Square, there are elevators to the street, and a block away is 46th Avenue, and you just take it almost all the way to the East River. And they have a large outdoor lot where they do live concerts every weekend, and inside there's a large ramp that goes up into the building. And we have a couple of wheelchair users who come pretty often, and they have big art exhibits, they have live shows, all kinds of things, and Friday night jazz for free.
That's
So we'd love to have you come there.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Zoe, for calling in with that. And what about going to a museum in a wheelchair? Is that something you tried during your staycation?
I did, and it was wonderful. It
Hmm.
was fantastic. I really enjoyed looking at art in that way. And, I did miss my vantage point, but I just see it as a different vantage point. And so museums had elevators. I think the only thing that was difficult in the museum space was going from one exhibit to the other. If there was a door, it had a pretty large handle that was difficult for me to open the
Oh, yeah.
door if it didn't have like a button, but that would be the only hindrance. But museums are such beautiful spaces, and it felt good to be surrounded by art.
I remember visiting a museum recently where the spaces were so cool, right? You know, the way you got from
Hmm.
one room to the next. But a lot of
Hmm.
them involved a little step down here, a little step up there. And it was
Hmm.
like a wonderful moving through the space kind of a setup. But I kept thinking, wow, this would be very difficult.
For a wheelchair user,
Yes,
yes.
absolutely. And let's see if we can take another call. Let's hear from Ted from Montclair, New Jersey. Welcome.
Yes, hi there. Hi, Yewande. My hat is off to you for navigating New York in a wheelchair. I know that's tough. I know that because my wife and I, Bibi, live in Montclair, New Jersey. We come into New York pretty often, we have a handicap van. It's actually a New York City taxi cab modified for wheelchair. And the hard part for us is finding parking because it's very difficult to park your own vehicle now that the Port Authority's parking deck is gone forever. It's a big, big problem. However, once you get in, there are a lot of fun things to do. We recently went to see a play, Well, I'll Let You Go, a great play, and we were able to sit on the stage with the wheelchair, which was a thrill. So.
Ted, thank you so much for calling in. What about that parking?
Yes, parking. So my family and I have a car that we use to navigate the city sometimes, and it feels like we have to be pretty exacting because we can't park in front of a high curb. Because the space from the car to the curb becomes almost impossible to get into my wheelchair. So we end up parking by a curb cut. But then, in New York City, you can't park there. And so it's a two-person job to just park in the city. Definitely. It's a little more difficult to navigate, but it's still doable.
Well, Yewande, you're a food writer, so getting good meals is definitely a priority. What was the restaurant experience like when you approached getting around the city and enjoying this staycation?
Gosh, the restaurant experience was incredible. I'm finding that the way my wheelchair is built, it's often difficult for the arms of my wheelchair to go under the table. And so I started managing it by just sitting sideways to eat. And I would sit sideways when my guest would be in front of me. And so I now have figured out that if I sit on the end of the table, my legs could fit under the table, but my wheelchair arm could be on the side of the table. And so that was the only difficulty that I've had so far. But as long as the restaurant doesn't have a step in, then I'm game.
Did you call ahead a lot of these restaurants to find out, are they accessible? And if that's the way you approached it, were they truly accessible once you got there?
Yes, it always required that I list in the reservation that I'm in a wheelchair, sort of the same way you would list allergies. And as long as I think that the only difficulty was navigating a crowded restaurant, but it only requires other guests to sort of move out the way so I can get by. But I mean, so far, I feel like restaurants have been a safe space for me as a wheelchair user.
That's great to hear. And I'm going to take another call. If you want to join the conversation, give us a call. It's 212-433-9692. Let's hear from Wendy in Soho. Welcome.
Hi. First, I just want to send hugs through the air to Yewande because she's such an inspiration. And I read her article, and she just is living a very full life. And she's inspirational. I have some minor changes that happened to me compared to her, but there were some surgical errors in some back surgery, and I got from that a drop foot, which means I can't lift one of my feet, so I wear a foot brace and I use a rollator. And there's so many things that you don't notice prior to having changes, like every bump in the sidewalk. And one of my big pet peeves is when you come to the end of the curb and you want to go down. If there's not an angle, it's very difficult with wheels. And so I actually live in Soho, and Janine Kiley, who's been she's been trying to win the election for District 66, an assemblywoman. It's a tight race, and they're still counting votes. But anyhow, every time I come to a corner, and it's very hard to go down, they don't have the angle that I'm talking about, I take pictures and I send them to Janine Kiley, and she's helping me to get them fixed, just to put some pavement in it or something, and it really, really makes it a difference. And changes for me, I haven't been able to use the subway, and that this is 2 years later. I'm just able to do stairs with a special cane.
Well, thank you so much for calling in. And, the hustle and bustle of getting around in New York, it's such a quintessential part of New York City life. Is there a point where you start to appreciate all of that hustle and bustle again, or no? Is it mostly a nuisance?
I mean, I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, so I feel like the hustle and bustle is intrinsically part of who I am. And it I feel like it also drives me. But then I think that I've also gotten better at knowing when to stop and knowing when to just turn it off and knowing when I just have to take a break and relax. And I think this has helped me see the difference and just live my life so intentionally that I understand when to hustle and bustle and when to just relax and take it all in and sit back with my plants.
Sit back with your plants.
With my plants, yeah.
Well, Yewande, maybe I could get you to respond to this text here. I'll just read it out. It says, Magnus here. As a recently disabled, I use a walker, fairly tall and imposing black man, I have been extremely pleasantly surprised at the kindness of strangers. The help and assistance I receive on a daily basis often makes me emotional. I was used to being treated with fear. Compassion has been a welcome new experience.
Oh, that's so sweet. That's so beautiful. Yeah, I experienced that as well. I'll give you an example. I had to go into a restaurant where it was a pretty steep couple of steps up, and they said they had a ramp, and they did put a ramp down. But I was like, oh my God, my wheelchair is literally at a 90-degree angle going up, and it was scary. And the restaurant owner came down and called 4 different porters to help me lift my wheelchair up those steps. And I don't know these people. I just wanted to eat at that restaurant. And it was such an incredible event for me, for 4 different people to get me into the restaurant. And when I was done with dinner, they also came and got me down safely. And so the kindness of strangers, yes, I accept that and I relish in it now. And I love that this listener is also relishing in that.
That's beautiful. And let's take a quick last call here. Marion from Princeton, New Jersey. Welcome to all of it.
Hi. First, thank you for doing this segment. As a longtime wheelchair user, one of the things I have found when in Midtown is that this isn't an infrastructure problem. People tend to congregate waiting for the light to change in the curb cut. And my husband will have to tap people on the shoulder and say, excuse us, excuse us, excuse us. And as soon as they realize they're blocking someone in a wheelchair, people do move, which is lovely, but they really shouldn't be congregating there. That's not what the purpose of the curb cut is. And the other problem is that especially around Times Square, some of the curb cuts are just ground down. They're not really a true curb cut, and boy, does it make for a rough ride.
Wow, Marion, thank you so much for that. And that's a great heads up, right? Don't block the curb cut. Think about who's around you, right?
Absolutely, yes. Please don't block the curb cut. There are people that have to get through.
And I just want to wrap up here. I know this is really off topic. Yewande Komolafe, you're a food writer for the New York Times. I just want to give a quick heads up. If you haven't checked out all of your videos and your writing, you have to, because I looked at a lot of photos yesterday and they really messed me up. I was very hungry.
I aim to do that, so I'm glad you responded in that way.
Wonderful, wonderful. Check it out. If you haven't already, check out all of the food writing as well. Yewande Komolafe, food writer for the New York Times. She also has this piece in the Times about rediscovering the city as a wheelchair user. Yewande, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.